Let's give a big hand to our welcome remarks again. Really great remarks from Suzanne Dorsey, Kristen Fleckenstein, and also Madam Ortiz. I'm very grateful for them to all being here today. Thank you for being here. Next, we're very happy to have our keynote speaker, Sam Himmelrich, who will speak to you about how this wonderful building came to be, and history, and also just a lot of excellent information about how Brownfields became an important component of the work that we do. Without further ado, here's Sam. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Sam Himmelrich. I'm one of the developers of Montgomery Park. It's the former Montgomery Ward Catalog House building. And Baltimore Heritage is a local organization celebrating buildings in the Baltimore area. And Johns Hopkins heads the organization and does 5-minute pieces. This is about 6 minutes, so on different buildings. And he did a fabulous piece on the history of this building, which we're going to show to you now. So.
Hello, everybody. This is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-minute histories videos. And today we're going to talk about the Montgomery Ward building. I'm here just outside of Carroll Park at Washington Boulevard and Monroe Street, if you know where that is. I'd like to say a quick thanks to a gentleman, Fred Shokin, for doing some wonderful research on this building. So thanks, Fred. All right, Montgomery Ward. It was founded in 1872 in Chicago, and in a lot of ways, it was the Amazon of its day. Just like Amazon did not pioneer really the new technology of sending stuff by mail, Montgomery Ward did not do that either back then, but both of those groups, companies, latched onto it in a big way. And Montgomery Ward went on to be the real king of catalog sales. Let me give you a little sense of its growth. In 1872, when it was founded, its catalog was 1 page of farm manufacturing stuff, farm equipment. By 1883, so 10 years later, its catalog was 240 pages with 10,000 goods for sale. And by 1900, its catalog was a whopping 1,000 pages with 70,000 things for sale that you could get by mail. It had such success by the 1890s, a number of rivals sprang up, including Sears and Roebuck, maybe its chief rival. Those two sort of duked it out on the national level to be king of the mail order world. And one way they did that was by building warehouses in different regions of the country. Montgomery Ward started out by building a warehouse in Kansas City, and then I think one in Fort Worth and one in Portland, Oregon, and then another one out in Oakland, California. If you take a look at that list, what is missing is East Coast. It did not have anything on the East Coast by the 19-teens. And that's where Baltimore comes in. Back in the 19-teens, there was an organization, a city agency called the Baltimore Association of Commerce, sort of like the Baltimore Development Corporation of its day. Its mission was to lure companies in. And it had its eyes on Montgomery Ward. Philadelphia also had its eyes on Montgomery Ward, again, in a parallel to today's Amazon. Do you remember a few years ago when Baltimore and pretty much every other city in the country was trying to lure Amazon's second headquarters to their city? Well, that's what was happening back in the 19-teens. We knew what Montgomery Ward wanted, and that was a site next to a railroad track, so they could have access to that, and also next to a park. The founder of Montgomery Ward was a big park advocate and wanted his employees to have that as an amenity. So in the late 19-teens, Mayor Howard Jackson and a group from our Parks Board goes to meet with the executives from Montgomery Ward, and they offer up this site, which was perfect. It's next to a park, and it's got access to the railroad. We had bought the site, which is on the west side of Monroe Street, before World War I, intending to expand Carroll Park, but that never happened. During World War I, we leased it to the federal government for a munitions facility. And then after the war, we leased it to a company that manufactured automotive paints in the 1910s. So this site never got its footing as a park. The Montgomery Ward folks loved it. They paid $11,500 for it, $3,000 more per acre than its assessed value. And Baltimore got a little bit of cash and also a jobs magnet. 1,500 people were employed here. So the building was built in 1925, and it was pretty neat back then. Still is pretty neat. It is fireproof. It is built entirely of poured concrete, except for a little bit of wood and decorative trim in the lobby. Its shape is kind of like a letter 4, which allowed a lot of window area so that they could take advantage of natural light. Helped by 1,000 windows, each with multiple panes. And then it's got a railroad shed, not just as part of the site, but in the middle of the building. The railroad, the rail car would pull into the middle of the building, and with the help of industrial elevators, move stuff up and down. But it also had an interesting innovation, which were sort of curly Q chutes in the middle of the building, so that if you were on the top floor and you had a package ready to go and the 4 o'clock train was about to pull out, you could shove it in that chute and it would spiral its way down and get on that train before it left. And Montgomery Ward did very well here. In fact, it had a retail outlet, a department of 86 different departments with 30,000 items for sale. So if you were in Baltimore and you could get yourself here, you could have quite the shopping trip. Things went well until America really started to urbanize throughout the 20th century. And eventually people were able to walk to department stores and the use of mail order declined. Eventually the retail sales at Montgomery Ward outpaced the catalog sales, and things began to slip on both counts. By the 1960s, Montgomery Ward had merged with a group called the Container Corporation of America. And by the 1970s, Mobil Oil had bought that so that Montgomery Ward was owned by Mobil. Mobil eventually shut down the catalog sales and then the retail outlet, and the building was vacant. But we're going to end on a good note. About 15 years ago, 2 local developers, Himmelrich Associates and Terra Nova Ventures, Sam Himmelrich and David Tafaro, if you know them, bought this big building and converted it into offices. In fact, at 1.2 million square feet, it is the largest office building in Baltimore. So I'll invite you to come on down and take a look, whether you shopped here in person or got stuff through the mail order catalog. Come down and take a look at the Amazon of the day 100 years ago. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.
We are actually inside the train shed. So if you could look about you on the left and the right, you'll see masonry. And the area where we are had depressions in the floor of about 4 or 5 feet so that trains could come in. They would open the doors on both sides, and the elevators are actually right in this area as well. So that's how it worked. What's interesting about this property and other properties are that they sat vacant for a long period of time. And it sat vacant, obviously, because of environmental concerns. And one of the things that had happened was that when the EPA and other enforcement agencies came about, the first thing they did was tried to figure out who had created the pollution, and it really wasn't very systematic. And one of the things that happened was lenders got dragged into the equation. So if someone lent money to a property and the developer or sponsor was not strong, at some point in time there were stories, horror stories to banks, of being responsible for cleaning up properties where they only lent money. So what happened was the federal government, state government, local governments, recognizing this problem, initiated Brownfield's legislations to allow banks and owners to have a predictable responsibility, and, lenders particularly knew that they weren't going to get dragged into these situations. So in Maryland, in 1997, in an effort to take properties like these, this is not this property is interesting because of its size and its impact on the neighborhood. It is not the most exciting remediation project, which we'll talk about in a second. But in 1997, the state really initiated its Brownfields program and started issuing no further action letters, not this building, but another building that we own and manage less than a mile from here. The Parker Metal Decorating Company was the first Baltimore City property to go through the Brownfields program. Paris Glendenning, I don't know whether it was a ribbon cutting, I was there, but I forget what the procedure was, but he announced it, and in 1997, it also was the first property to get a no further action letter from the state of Maryland allowing us to develop it. Interestingly, the reason this building was acquired when we acquired it was because we had done other work in South Baltimore and kind of identified it as an area easy to get to Washington and has some wonderful attributes, including access to the highway. And, it's not a downtown building, but it really is, has a lot of suburban-like attributes, including a decent amount of land around it. And in Baltimore, a lot of people do drive as much as we're, would love to have fabulous mass transit. We had driven by this building a number of times, and at some point, and I had looked at other buildings and realized that buildings that were seemingly this deep were very difficult to renovate. But at some point, I took a tour through the place and realized that above us is air and therefore a big atrium, so that the actual spaces are not, as they appeared to be, hundreds of feet deep, but only 140 feet deep or 80 feet deep. And when we figured that out, we acquired it directly from Montgomery Ward Company, which was then in existence. And we thought our plan was to take, if you remember the four, there's a slice of the building that goes towards the intersection at the corner of Monroe and Washington Boulevard, and we figured we could renovate a couple 100,000 square feet, the size of that, and kind of mothball the rest. Interestingly, after we acquired it, and we had competition, a lot of people had tried to acquire it. From 1985, when the retail store closed for 15 years, it was empty. They heated it. There was one wonderful guy who had been a Montgomery Ward employee who came here every day with his dog to keep an eye on the place. And we became very good friends as we did our due diligence. But after we did this, the Maryland Department of the Environment, actually the Department of General Services of Maryland, issued a request for proposal for the Department of the Environment. And it was the first ever RFP with any credit for environmental considerations, which is interesting because even though it was the MDE who was a user, it was DGS that really was promoting green buildings, and they sent out as part of the RFP a lot of things about other green buildings that had been done. When we saw it, we realized that unbeknownst to us, we had been green developers. Not because we were, kind of tree huggers, but we were thrifty. So, for example, we own a mill in Mount Washington where they had added beams in order to support heavier weights of bolts and nuts. And in order to renovate that as an office building, we took those out and we use those in another mill down the street, which we own, Meadow Mill. Okay, but we did it not because we were saving trees, but we were saving money on lumber. And we also had always been closet kind of HVAC electrical fans, even though we don't have a lot of formal education, but we've always been very interested in life cycle costing and what does the equipment cost and what does it cost to own it for a long period of time. So when this RFP came out, we assembled a team to respond to DGS. Key to the team was a guy named Jack Ross. And Jack Ross is a mechanical engineer and an electrical engineer who has done all of Hopkins infrastructure and the Center for Disease CDC in Atlanta and NIH's infrastructure. And he really looked at the options for this building from a mechanical electrical standpoint. Additionally, a woman who worked for an architectural firm called HOK named Katrin Schultz-Bart, who was actually a East German who had moved to West Germany and was a green roof expert and helped us with our green roof and our selection of materials. And then an architect we had used named Werner Mueller, who worked for Jim, which I think is now a division of AECOM, was very helpful. The DGS system the DGS RFP had a point system for sustainable things, particularly lighting. And I'd like to go through some of the things that we responded to the RFP with. First of all, DGS's spec was really quite old-fashioned despite this new insertion of the green stuff, in that they wanted hung ceilings throughout. They wanted 50-foot candles or 60-foot candles everywhere, which is about the light if you're doing open heart surgery, and you had to have it in the corner. So there were some odd specs we responded to. So one of the things we did was we put in lighting with daylight dimming, which incidentally has changed a lot since the advent of LED. It's actually gone through 3 lighting kind of retrofits in the MDE area. All of the power in here, we have our own substations, and we distribute primary power, which saves on voltage drop. We, in this building, have chillers that are very efficient and that make ice in the summertime during the night. So instead of working afternoons, literally we don't run the chillers. We melt ice, which makes the chiller smaller, et cetera. Additionally, as a result of having this ice storage, the pipes are smaller and the vents are smaller, saving a lot of material. The other thing which happens here, which interestingly made a difference in COVID, most buildings bring in a required minimum quantity of outside air. 15 cubic feet per minute per person. This building, on a day, interestingly, like today, 100% of the air delivered into the spaces, if possible, is outside air. It senses the temperature and humidity and automatically has ductwork and provision so that literally all of the air on a day like today. Now, obviously in the summertime it doesn't work quite that way because it's expensive to bring in outside air, and the outside air is hot and humid, but on a day like today, it works that way. Another feature of this building is all of the water that hits the roof of the buildings, and it's a big footprint, as well as all of the water that hits the site, the asphalt, is routed into a cistern by the front, pumped up into a tank on the 9th floor of the penthouse, and we use it to flush toilets. We would use it for the urinals, but our urinals are flushless, okay, which reduces the effluent to the treatment plants. Okay, we tried to do it for the sinks, but the health department wouldn't let us. I'm kidding, of course. So we have 2 green roofs in this building as well. One right above us, another in a different spot. And it was really, I think, the biggest. I don't know if it remains the biggest green roof. An interesting story is there once was a head of the Department of Planning named Harriet Tregoning. I think I pronounced her name right. And she came to this building once, and she said, "God, that's a great-looking green roof, but I have a question." I said, what's the question? I said, "Why'd you, she said, where you put it, it gets a lot of shade in the day and therefore doesn't do as much work." And it was kind of an interesting thing. She was right, but it also, people saw it, and it was important for people to see it as a concept. But I was impressed that she very quickly picked up and, casually criticized us. All of the parking lots here use bioretention. So one of the interesting things about a green building is this building is also a historic building. So we have in this building, as Johns Hopkins said, 1,000 windows with a lot of panes. Well, the number is about 62,000 panes of windows. And we replace them. Now, usually what people do is they figure out how to get rid of the windows. We, as part of our historic tax credit application, ended up replacing 62,000 windows with low E argon-filled panes. And, it maintains the look of the building. And we took the glass, because we took out the old glass, and we mixed it up and made asphalt, but we used the glass as aggregate in the very front. And you realize this was a lot of windows. We crushed them up, and it made like a little path. You realize it kind of put materials in scale when you see how little asphalt it actually made. In any case, so I've really described those are largely energy things. The other category are reuse of materials. And what's interesting is I personally think the energy things are resources because it repeats time after time. And the materials are, more one time. And I would say that one of the key components of a sustainable building is doing it right the first time. If you can plan, and we have planners here, and think about the life cycle and create flexibility. There's a great book called How Buildings Learn by a guy named Stuart Brandt, who also wrote the whole Earth catalog, or was involved in it. And it really talks about buildings that last a long time and buildings that don't. And I'd like to go through the things that we did and then talk about how they work today generally. So one of the things we did, which was very recycled, is we had amazing carpet, which had spent 10 years at USAA, the insurance company's floors in San Antonio. And Milliken, the carpet vendor, took it up from them, replaced it, and took that carpet and overprinted it and trimmed it, and we bought it, and used it in MDE and Lottery's space, which is pretty amazing, and it was here for another 10 plus years, okay? It's subsequently been replaced with a new carpet. using a lot of recycled material, which is a state spec carpet. We have high recycled content ceiling tiles and clouds, which I'm going to come back to. We have partitions, which are built of wheat board, which I think they still make, but I'm not sure, covered with Homosode. Homosode is an amazing product, and I've been to their plant in Trenton, where they take newspapers, I don't know where they get them these days because nobody reads them, they all read online, and they dump them out and they put it in a slurry, and then they use heat and they mold them into this very cool product, and then it's bound with Guilford of Maine recycled fabric. So if you look at the partitions, they're amazingly recycled. They also are capped with wood which has UV cured because there's no off-gassing or hydrocarbons which occurred, and the wood is second growth ash, not first growth wood. And there's a lot of this material stuff which matters. We are the first building in the city to have flushless urinals, and when we installed them, the health department head was Peter Bielenson, who I happen to know because he was a neighbor of mine, and he came out and the inspector said, "We can't approve these." I said, "What do you mean you can't approve?" "Well, we can't." So he came out. He gave us a 6-month waiver to test them, and then they were going to reevaluate them in 6 months. I don't think they ever came back. And you see flushless urinals everywhere today. It's like, but it's interesting. All the ceramic tile came from, other places, which had very high recycled content. What's interesting, though, is we succeeded getting DGS to select us. And when we did that, all of a sudden DGS said, we can't be in a building, and we had never proposed they be in the corner because they were more square footage than that. We can't be in a building that's partially renovated. You have to renovate the whole. We had a lot of square footage on the exterior, a lot of windows, and candidly, financing it became the next very big challenge. And what's interesting is the collection of sources. First of all, no local banks, even after we lined up all these other financings, would do it. Citibank's Community Reinvestment Group actually did the project. The HUD has, as part of their community block grant program, a HUD 108 loan program. And we went to Baltimore Development and said, what can we do? And they said, well, there's this HUD 108 program. We don't know anything about it. We don't know anything. We've never done one. But Philadelphia's done a lot. So I called Philadelphia, spoke to PIDC, and they put me in touch with the guy from Philadelphia who had already written half a dozen successful applications. They were not applying that time. Caleb Benjamin, who had written their application, wrote our application, and subsequent to doing that ended up working for us for a number of years. I spoke to him last night. They still use it. Additionally, we had federal historic tax credits. Key to a building like this, couldn't have done it without it. And very importantly, Maryland historic tax credits. I'm a board member of Preservation Maryland. Buildings like these get renovated more often as a result of state tax credits. Maryland has a good program, but their cap on it certainly serves as a detriment to a lot of other projects. In addition to that, Maryland had initiated a BRIP program, Brownfields, Reinvestment Initiative program, I think, and we got a $2 million grant for that. The Empowerment Zone, and this is in an empowerment zone, had a pool of money. They were very careful with it. They lent us money, but we had to back it up with a letter of credit, which we got from a Philadelphia-based investment fund, and we were lucky because we paid it off within a year. And additionally, my partner, David Tufaro, and I, put in a slug of equity as well. So it was complicated financing, and I think these kinds of projects take, and it sounds like, it's all going fine. There were a lot of days where we were on the edge of our seats figuring out if that could occur. At some point, a number of years later, Baltimore Development and EPA nominated us. There's a program called the Phoenix Award, which each region creates a project to receive the award. We were, before we went to Portland, where the national event was, given the Phoenix Award for Region 3. We went out to Portland, and these presentations were amazing. Some guy had done a rail yard, and they had excavated, and they had found a boxcar or some tanker that they, and I'm sitting there saying, I had environmental remediation envy, because these guys were, so I was sure we were going to, not win, place, or show, and we ended up winning. This building won that year the Phoenix Award for the country. And the reason is because the criteria was not how problematic the environmental was, nor how big. It really was, what was the impact of the project on the community? And what the Brownfields program of Maryland allowed us to do was stabilize a trend of deterioration, which had occurred in West Baltimore and west of Pigtown. And I think some of Pigtown's success being redeveloped may be helped by our stabilizing and anchoring this piece of it. So while this is an early sustainable project, the landscape of the issues have changed a lot since we did this. All of a sudden, we have high-efficiency boilers. There's an all-electric preference today, which incidentally, today, there are some mixed feelings because on really heavy electric use days, the generators of the electricity are certainly not sustainable, so it's really an interesting question. Solar has become much more feasible. We looked at solar when we did the building. There was no way, given that we had to, so let me step back. One of the interesting tasks when we went to the state was the most important criteria was price. So the challenge was coming up with all of these sustainable components, without breaking the bank. So we were very focused on which things we could do and fit into giving the Department of General Services a price that would cause them to move the agency here. So it was not, in any case. So solar stuff, electrical vehicle accommodation is now a big issue. Tesla wasn't even, I think, a glimmer in Elon Musk's eye when we did this renovation. LED lights have totally changed, have taken over, and interestingly, either through good planning or perhaps good luck, almost all of our renovations remain useful and relevant. So I started to talk about the state's all-hung ceiling requirement. It was a requirement. We responded that they could have all-hung ceilings and plain floors, or if they wanted to, at the same price, we would give them 100% raised floor and ceilings in clouds, okay, which was more expensive to us by far, but we realized that the agency would be much better off if we do it. Interestingly, much of the raised floor in this building is also reused. When Goldman Sachs moved out of offices in areas that became residential, we bought their used raised floor. It's good as new, and have redeployed it in this building. You know, it's under carpet, you can't tell anyway. So, in any case, so we feel good about the building. It is an amazing place, predominantly because of how Montgomery Ward built it in 1925. And we're lucky to be able to continue to reuse it. And, you know, we thank MDE and DGS for choosing it. I thank Todd and his crew for running the place every day, because they do a fabulous job. And I thank you all for coming and for letting me talk about what we did here. It's been a fun time, and we continue to adapt it to other uses. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Sam, for that very educational keynote. We are moving into just a 5-minute break. We're running a little behind, and then we'll continue into session 1. My name is Sylvia Mosser. I'm with the Maryland Department of Planning, and I'll be helping transition us between sessions and into breaks and lunch. I think it's really wonderful to be able to have kind of a better understanding of the history and the environmental significance of this site where we're sitting today. So thank you so much, Sam. So I think it might be around 10:42. So we'll try to be back here by 10:47, and then we'll have another break after session 1 and lunch later today.